Hello everyone, this is Marcel. So as I'm kind of allowing my new lifestyle to stabilize and figuring where my channel's going to fit into all that, I've decided to shoot for one video per week as kind of a minimal, and I'm going to place that video on Fridays, Friday morning. I know that the almighty YouTube algorithm gods won't be pleased, but it's what I'm going to shoot for. Let's see how it works out. In the meantime, if anybody has any suggestions, put them down below. I'll take a look. So I spent quite a bit of time thinking on how I wanted to articulate this video. It came from a situation initially where I was out with a few of my friends who happened to be LGBT. Coincidentally, on that particular day, a group of them had set up a table and were handing out flyers and talking to people about LGBT rights and stuff, doing the typical political discussions and all that, and I felt like initially I was fitting in just fine talking to them. Well, after they got everything up and running, a gentleman I didn't know came up and tried to speak to me. He looked a little bit like a bear wearing lipstick, but to each their own. And almost the very first thing out of his mouth was, "So what are you?" Now, although that's not normally how I would greet someone, I knew what he was asking. But before I even had a chance to answer, one of my supposed friends from behind me pipes up and says, "Oh, he's only Marcel." And half of them look at me with kind of a scowl on their face like, ew. It felt like I had farted in a quiet office. It was horrible. And from that point forward, the conversations were awkward, and I ultimately had to leave. Situations like that seem to be happening more often, and the thing is, I'd never told that friend my preference. She was assuming. Now, coincidentally, she guessed right, but does that really matter? Is that what should define me? Probably not. But I'm beginning to realize very quickly that there are communities of people in this world that define themselves by the community that they associate with, as opposed to things like their ideas, their accomplishments, their goals. For that specific group of people, it was more important that they only be surrounded by others that followed their same sexual preferences. Though there is one specific difference that I see when it comes to LGBT, as it's so-called, LGBT plus, or they're coming out with frickin' alphabet soup. Firstly, I don't have anything against someone and their personal preferences. If they want to date guys, girls, I would personally not recommend dating anyone. But if they choose to date outside of their gender or in their gender, who cares? That's their preference. That's their business. But when it comes to LGBT, one of these situations or preferences is not like the other ones. Transsexuals, at least what they were originally, is not a preference, it's a medical condition. Now, I'm not transphobic, and I'm not trying to piss anybody off, but things like gender dysphoria or being born with the wrong genitals, these are legitimate medical problems. Now, if a guy is born, for example, without a Y chromosome, that can be really tough. It must be a really difficult experience, not feeling like they're fitting in anywhere and then ultimately making the decision to go along with what their genetics or with what their psychology or their genomes say. To get to my point though, there's two problems that I see starting to become more apparent and more pronounced in our society. And that is, one, it's not that there's an issue with the LGBT community in a whole. It's that it's becoming a community, and there are a lot of just ordinary straight people that are getting ostracized and isolated outside of these quote-unquote groups because they don't want to go along with that narrative and be something, be an ism, be a alphabet thing. So people are feeling pressured to go along with their narrative just so that they can get along with these people. I know some personally who are not actually gay. They're not actually bi or trans or any of the other things. They're literally just saying it so they can get along with their original clique of friends. Granted, they could also be lying to me, so take that with a grain of salt. The second problem that is arising is this concept that medical conditions, things that are not a preference or a choice, at least maybe some people will argue with that, but fine, I'm calling it a choice. Because if it's something they can snap their fingers and change their mind and not get judged for it, and not have any repercussions in their life other than maybe the loss of a relationship, guess what? It's a freaking choice. Anyway, when it comes to medical conditions, like legitimate medical problems, those shouldn't be trending. But I can break down where a lot of this is coming from and where it's going to lead to. So the first thing I mentioned, when it comes to conformity, people with the loudest voices are going to have the loudest impact on the way social interactions happen, especially in colleges, in groups of young people. There's always this motivation, this push to conform, to get along, to make friends, and it's almost an obsession for some of these young people. So when a big group of loud students or loud kids keep pushing these narratives, there's going to be the sheep that pipe up and be like, me too, I'm one of you, I just want to get along. I have someone who personally went to a school that was actually a religious school. I won't say which, but it was deeply religious school. This is kind of like a special high school where they had an LGBT room where these students can go into it. And I know this person personally, so I know that it's true. Well, the students would go in there and actually use this room that they could close the door and were not supposed to be bothered while they're doing their discussions and things. They would go in there and have sex. That's what they were doing in the room. And considering the topics were on sexual preference, I don't see why anybody would be surprised. But this is a group of teenagers going in there. In fact, it became something of a game for them where they would discuss like who had done it the most times in the big couch that they had in the room for sitting and talking. And I don't know what would be worse, whether or not the parents and teachers were completely oblivious to this concept, that it was being used for that purpose, or the fact that they would know it and not do anything about it just because they were so worried about getting attacked with their oppressing their sexual preferences and stuff. Childhood and the experiences people have when they're younger kind of craft. It creates the adult that they're going to become, and that's what's generating the adults of our next society, of our next generation. So wait for that to hit. The point is that these few loud people, the squeaky wheels that want to get greased, are hiding behind sexual preference to give kind of a sense of armor to their points, to their political or even their social motivations. They're using the fact that they're blank oppressed group in order to push their narrative through and shield away any opposition that they would have. People can't attack them because they're blank preference. Then these same people that have the quote-unquote loudest personalities will also draw in a lot of others to follow along with them because they tend to be social trendsetters in a bad or good sense, depending on how you want to look at it. People vote for the politicians that they see the most signs for. What you visualize the most of is what you're going to remember, even if it's not in a good context. Very few voters actually read the policies behind the politicians that they vote for. They just saw their name, so it clicks, and they're like, oh, that guy or that girl, I'll vote for them. Social situations are the same concept. You recognize someone who's noticed the most, and that's the person that they might gravitate to. At least that's one possibility for it. Let me know if you disagree. Now, on the topic of medical conditions, it wasn't that long ago that all of the schools were trying to give their students Ritalin, and was it Dextrose, the other one, something like that? All this ADHD medication. The push to get as many people as possible diagnosed with a problem that they have to explain their behaviors. Well, you'll see that a lot from people. It's easier to blame a condition on a social problem than it is to take agency over that social problem. No, my kid's not an asshole. They're not, a misbehaved little brat. They just have ADHD. You'll see that in relationships sometimes too, where the woman will try and claim that she has some kind of mental condition that's the explanation for the way she's treating the guy. Now, I could name off a bunch of examples that I've heard in the past, but has anyone else heard where they try and blame their behaviors on a mental condition, but then if you actually ask them if they take any meds for it, or if they've had it diagnosed, well, no, I just kind of looked it up, or you get mixed, wishy-washy answers for it. There's been, over the last decade or two, kind of a social push that if there's any kind of a problem, and maybe this has always been true and I just wasn't old enough to notice it, that they want to label everything. And then those labels become common enough that people will start picking them up on their own. Have you ever seen the jokes like squirrel, for the ADHD? Anytime someone is fidgety and distracted, that they say that it's an ADHD moment, but that's a legitimate medical condition, not just something where someone has had too much coffee. So where does that all tie in when it comes to LGBT? Well, whether you want to blame the behavior of most men nowadays on society oppressing everything that's masculine, whether you want to blame it on soy products and estrogen hormones pumped into the food to make bigger, fatter cows that produce more milk and make more babies, no matter what you want to say is the cause, there's an increasing number of men out there that are feeling wrong. They're not getting the right amounts of testosterone in their bodies. Things are going awry as far as how they're socially treated. And there's a number of different ways that a person can handle that if they feel wrong. Now, they could take agency and make choices like, you know what? I'm not happy with all these relationships, the way they're working out. Screw you guys, screw you girls. I'm out of here. I'm going to go MGTOW. But for a weaker individual or someone who doesn't have the knowledge or the support to realize what's really going on, they're probably going to internalize it. They're going to blame themselves and start looking for answers for that sense of wrongness. Well, who has the loudest voices? All these people that are trying to tell everyone that they're on a spectrum of, sexual preferences, handing out oppression points like candy. I'm sure nothing feels more comforting than telling a feminist what she wants to hear and having her console you. Okay, so most of us wouldn't find that comforting, but I'm sure someone who is confused and scared and just wants to be accepted might be a little bit different. Geez, when I really think of it that way, feminists almost feel like predators, don't they? Creepy. Anyway, bad ideas that are taking away people's individuality are spreading rampant nowadays. And it's all revolving around this whole victim narrative. Well, just in the same sense that there's this ADHD, people can't focus, there's too much caffeine in the chocolate, well, it must be a medical condition. There's an LGBT, or more specifically, a transsexual push that, you feel wrong, you can't get a date, you must be trans, you're actually a woman in your mind. Then with all these artificial hormones and things going on with society, little boys having their parents put them in a dress, and when the kid looks up and says, Mom, I feel weird, she's like, that's just society, don't you let them hold you back. No, Mom, this dress feels weird, like I don't feel right. No, that's just society, you be yourself, you're beautiful. Yeah, that's actually happening. It's no surprise that there's so many people claiming things that they might actually not be. And of course, feminists are along the side fanning the flames. One of my friends, I've known him since I was like 15 years old. Had a really consistent personality, had some problems getting along with people sometimes because he is gay. More specifically, because his family was deeply religious and they kind of turned their backs on him, which sucks. He had been handling the whole situation since he was like 18 really well, but within the last couple of years, there's been this negative change in him. He started lying and acting really bizarre, starting drama where there shouldn't be any. It didn't make any sense until I did some digging and found out that he was actually getting a hold of black market hormone pills and trying to transition himself. So gentlemen, we are actually at that point where society is getting so screwed up that with people that don't have the medical insurance or the capabilities or the courage to talk to a doctor that want these transitions, they're making the choice to go to drug dealers to get the stuff. Kind of interesting too for anyone that wants to try and argue that there's no difference between the genders and the hormones don't change anything. Well, that's bullshit, because the minute anybody I know starts taking hormones to go female, their attitude just goes to shit. Really quickly, they begin to act like a woman in the negative context. Anyway, this video is starting to get a little bit long. As far as I'm concerned, if somebody wants to make a choice or have a preference that doesn't affect anyone else, I say let them do it. It doesn't affect anyone else. Let them be who they are. Let them do what they want to do. And as far as someone who's born with a medical condition that they have to deal with, if they choose to change it, who would have a right to stop them? Fine, let them go deal with their medical condition. I'm all for it. But when it comes to this concept of shoving things down other people's throat, meaning ideas, of course, they're crossing a line, and especially when it comes to how they're treating people that just happen to not follow along with their narrative, or worse yet, how the children are getting raised and treated in the school systems. Like, if I knew that my kid or a future kid or something were going to a school that would basically allow them to have sex with other kids if they happened to be LGBT, that's fucked up. There's no other way to put it. Anyway, let me know down below if you've heard any weird stories, if you have any thoughts on this. Am I overreacting? Is this not even an issue? Is it gonna get better? Tell me what you think. If you want to hear more content like this, like, subscribe, share, and until next time, this has been Marcel.